Two guards thought an old man with a bouquet of flowers was the perfect target for their clever jokes. They humiliated him, ripped his flowers apart, and dragged him through the crowd, confident in their righteousness. But behind the interrogation room doors, they heard something that brought them to their knees, tears streaming, begging for forgiveness. And that was just the beginning. The subway station was its usual chaotic mess, people rushing to catch their trains, the smell of street food lingering in the air, and the faint screech of metal wheels on tracks echoing through the cavernous space. Amid the hustle and bustle, a man entered the platform. George Anderson, a distinguished-looking, elderly black man. His silver beard was neatly trimmed, and he held a small bouquet of red and white carnations tied with a blue ribbon. His tailored suit, though a bit worn, hung perfectly on his shoulders. Despite his tired demeanor, there was an undeniable grace in the way he carried himself. Two white subway security guards, Rick and Tom, stood by the turnstiles looking for something, anything, to distract them from their boredom. When George walked in, they zeroed in on him like hawks spotting a rabbit. "Hey Tom, check this out," Rick muttered with a smirk, jerking his chin in George's direction. "Who wears a suit to the subway? What's this guy trying to prove?" Tom snorted, crossing his arms. "Maybe he's lost. Probably thinks he's heading to some fancy gala. Should we help him out or what?" Rick didn't wait for an answer. He raised his voice, making sure George could hear him. "Yo, Grandpa, this isn't a ballroom. You sure you don't want to walk instead? Might be safer for someone like you." George kept moving, his expression unchanged, eyes fixed on the tracks ahead. He had no time for nonsense. But his silence only fueled Rick's ego. "Oh, I see how it is," Rick said, nudging Tom. "Too good to acknowledge us, huh?" Tom chuckled. "Bet he can't even hear us, might as well be shouting at a wall." George finally stopped, turning slightly to glance at them. His voice was calm, measured. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm in a hurry." The lack of defensiveness in his tone seemed to irritate Rick even more. His smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. "A hurry, huh?" Rick sneered, stepping closer. "What's the rush, Pops? Got somewhere important to be? Or maybe you're hiding something?" Tom moved to flank George, cutting off his path. "Yeah, let's see what you're carrying there." He pointed to the bouquet. "Flowers? What are you, some kind of Romeo? Or did you swipe those from someone?" Before George could respond, Rick grabbed the bouquet out of his hands. Petals scattered onto the grimy station floor as he inspected the flowers with mock seriousness. "Red and white carnations, fancy," Rick drawled sarcastically. "What's the occasion, huh? Got a secret admirer?" "Please," George said, his voice slightly trembling but still dignified. "Those aren't yours, give them back." Rick wasn't listening. "You see this, Tom? Guy thinks he's untouchable just 'cause he's dressed up. Guess what, Gramps? We run this station, not you." Tom laughed, stepping closer. "That's right. You think you can just waltz in here with your little suit and flowers? Newsflash, people like you don't get a free pass." George took a step back, his eyes darting toward the exit. But Rick grabbed his arm, his grip rough. "You're not going anywhere," Rick barked. "Let's take a little detour to the back room. We'll figure out who you are and what you're up to." "Please," George tried again. "You're making a mistake." Rick scoffed. "Mistake? The only mistake here is thinking you could walk in like you own the place." The two guards dragged George away, ignoring the murmurs and uneasy glances from other passengers. The bouquet lay forgotten on the ground, crushed under the shuffle of hurried feet. For a man who had lived through more than most, George's dignity remained intact, but inside a storm was brewing. The room felt more like a storage closet than an actual interrogation space. Dim overhead lighting buzzed faintly, casting awkward shadows over the scratched metal table at the center. George Anderson sat quietly on a worn-out chair, his hands resting gently on his knees. His suit, once crisp, now looked crumpled and a little worse for wear. But his composure, rock solid. He wasn't slouching, fidgeting, or throwing anyone dirty looks. He just sat there, calm and collected, like a man who had nothing to prove. The door creaked open, and in walked Jack Miller, the head of subway security. He was a tall man with a sharp jawline and a military-style buzz cut that made him look like he meant business. Jack's expression was a mix of exhaustion and annoyance. Clearly, he didn't have time for whatever circus his staff had pulled him into. "All right," Jack began, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" His eyes flicked between Rick and Tom, who were now standing in the corner like two kids caught raiding the cookie jar. Rick cleared his throat, stepping forward with a rehearsed excuse. "This guy was acting suspiciously, sir. He had this bouquet. We thought we should check it out, just in case." "Suspiciously," Jack repeated, his tone laced with skepticism as he folded his arms. "So now carrying flowers is a red flag? What's next? You're going to stop someone for wearing a tie?" Tom jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "Look, we thought he might be hiding something in the flowers, like contraband or—" Jack raised a hand to silence him. "Stop. Just stop." He turned to George, his gaze softening slightly. "Sir, what's your name, and why are you here?" George met Jack's eyes, his voice steady but laced with quiet dignity. "My name is George Anderson. I was on my way to mind my own business when your men decided I looked out of place. They took my flowers, insulted me, and dragged me in here without cause." Jack's jaw tightened. Something about George's tone, it wasn't defensive or angry, just factual, made him pause. He glanced back at Rick and Tom, whose confidence was visibly crumbling. Before Jack could ask another question, the door opened again and another subway worker stepped in holding a clear plastic bag. Inside were the crumpled remains of George's bouquet. "Found these on the platform," the worker said, placing the bag on the table. Jack's eyes narrowed as he looked at the flowers, then at Rick and Tom. "You confiscated flowers from this man?" Rick hesitated, his bravado nowhere to be found. Yes, sir, but we didn't realize—" Jack cut him off, his tone icy. "Didn't realize what? That flowers don't exactly scream criminal mastermind? That maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't a threat?" Tom opened his mouth to speak, but immediately thought better of it. Jack let out a long sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose before turning back to George. "Mr. Anderson, I'd like to hear it from you. What exactly happened on that platform?" George straightened his posture, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I entered the station, intending to catch my train. These two gentlemen seemed to find that amusing. They made comments, grabbed my flowers, and accused me of— I'm not sure what. Then they brought me here." Jack leaned against the table, his frustration mounting. "And the flowers?" George's eyes flicked to the plastic bag. "For someone important to me, or at least they were." Jack's expression softened, but his voice remained firm as he addressed Rick and Tom. "You two outside, now." Rick and Tom exchanged nervous glances, but quickly shuffled out of the room, leaving Jack and George alone. Jack sat down across from George, the tension in the room finally starting to ease. "Mr. Anderson, let me be the first to apologize on behalf of my team," Jack said sincerely. "They clearly overstepped. I'll make sure this doesn't go unaddressed." George nodded slightly but said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. Jack leaned back, a deep sense of unease creeping over him. Something told him there was more to George Anderson than met the eye, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. The room was so quiet now. You could hear the faint buzz of the flickering light overhead. George Anderson sat straight in his chair, his hands resting gently on the table. His composure remained intact, but the weight of the moment was visible in his eyes. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "These flowers," he said, gesturing to the crumpled bouquet in the plastic bag, "were for my friends, for the men I served with, men who never came home." His words landed like a thunderclap. Rick and Tom froze, their bravado from earlier now replaced with stunned silence. "Today is the anniversary of the day I lost them," George continued, his tone steady but tinged with pain. "Every year I go to the memorial to honor their sacrifice. These flowers, they're all I can give them now." Rick shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence completely gone. Tom looked down at his feet, unable to meet George's gaze. Jack Miller, the head of subway security, leaned back in his chair, his face darkening as George's words sank in. He let out a slow breath, his voice quieter than before. "You're A veteran? Jack asked. George nodded. Yes, sir. I fought for this country, alongside men I called my brothers. And now all I have left are memories, and this day to honor them. Jack ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the shame that had suddenly settled there. He turned sharply to Rick and Tom. Do you two even realize what you've done? Jack's voice rose, breaking the silence. You didn't just disrespect this man, you disrespected everything he stands for, everything he fought for. Rick opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tom, still staring at the floor, finally managed a shaky whisper. We didn't know. Jack cut him off. Didn't know? You didn't bother to ask. You saw a man with flowers and made him a target. For what? Rick stepped forward, his voice low and filled with regret. Mr. Anderson, we were wrong. There's no excuse for what we did. I'm sorry. Tom followed, his voice trembling. Please, forgive us. We didn't mean... Well, it doesn't matter what we meant. What we did was wrong. To everyone's surprise, Rick dropped to one knee. Let us make it right, he said, his tone sincere. We'll do whatever it takes. George studied them both for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stood and walked over to the table. Picking up the bag of flowers, he held it delicately, as if it still carried its original meaning. It's not about the flowers, George said simply. It's about respect. Respect for those who gave their lives so you could stand here today. Jack cleared his throat and stepped forward. Mr. Anderson, he said, his voice steady, let us help you get to the memorial. And I promise what happened here today will never happen again. Rick and Tom both nodded quickly, their faces filled with determination. We'll replace the flowers, Rick added. A fresh bouquet, anything you need. With a slight nod, George allowed them to escort him out. By the time they reached the station entrance, Rick and Tom had purchased a new bouquet, bigger and more vibrant than the one they'd ruined. They insisted on carrying it themselves as they accompanied George to the memorial. Later that evening, a video of the confrontation went viral. A bystander on the platform had recorded the incident, capturing George's quiet dignity and the guard's eventual apology. The story sparked an outpouring of support for George and a broader conversation about respect for veterans. Rick and Tom didn't stop at an apology. They began volunteering with local veterans groups, using their time to give back to the people they'd once misunderstood. George, meanwhile, became a regular visitor at the station, always greeted warmly by the same guards who had once doubted him. Every year on the anniversary of that day, Rick and Tom joined George at the memorial. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a commitment to honor the lesson he had taught them. Respect isn't given lightly, but it can change everything. How would you have reacted if you were in George's place? What are your thoughts on this story? Share your comments below. Have you or someone you know ever faced something similar? Let us know your perspective, and don't forget to like this post if it moved you. This story was created to shine a light on important issues and promote kindness, understanding, and respect in our world. Together, we can make a difference. Your opinion matters. Let's make the world a better place, one story at a time.